Good morning, everyone. It is time to begin our Sustainable Urban Mobility Planning training program with the introductory webinar for the Module 1 about getting started with the SUMP process and its basic principles. My name is Ira Sibelius, and I'm your host today. I work for the Union of the Baltic Cities Sustainable Cities Commission, hosted by the city of Turku in Finland, and we are the lead partner of the SUMPs for BSR project that is behind the training program. The project is co-funded by the Interreg BSR program. In the SUMPs for BSR project, we are supporting small and mid-sized cities to develop and apply sustainable urban mobility planning. Since the beginning of our project in 2023, our focus has been on encouraging shift towards active mobility, improved data collection, and development of monitoring and evaluation practices. On our project website, you can read more about our project activities. But today, we're kicking off the free 5-module online training program on SUMP. That is one of the key activities of the SUMPs for BSR project. It is designed for the mobility planners and experts in the small and mid-sized cities throughout the Baltic Sea region, but it's open to anyone interested in our topics. The training program has 5 modules, each of which includes an introductory webinar, a practical and engaging workshop, as well as some independent learning materials and exercises to dive deeper into the topic. And all the training materials, including webinar recordings, will be available for self-study afterwards at the Baltic Sea Region SUMP Competence Center, that you can find the link and QR code here. And you can also find all the agendas and registration for all the upcoming events running all the way from now in January until the end of May. We're also offering a SUMP clinic, offering tailored support to 10 selected cities, again with a focus on the small and mid-sized cities. And each selected city will get 2 individual consultation meetings online with our SUMP experts, led by Dr. Kristina Gaučė, who I will shortly introduce to you. And in the end of the SUMP clinic, each city receives a personalized roadmap with some expert recommendations on the future actions to tackle the local challenges. We have a call for applications now open, and you can send your applications until 30th of January. So we have still a few weeks to go, and all the information and the application form can be found also on the Baltic Sea Region SUMP Competence Center website with the QR code and address here. So if you have any challenges with your SUMP, fill in the application and you can get this valuable support free of charge that helps you plan your next steps. But here is the agenda for today's webinar. In the module 1, like the name suggests, the aim is to help in getting started with the SUMP process and explain its basic principles, how it differs from traditional transport planning, highlighting the focus on sustainability. We will go through the key elements and steps of the SUMP process and explore the requirements of the TEN-T regulation for the urban nodes. And we will also hear about the upcoming updated SUMP guidelines and what is new in there. In addition to expert insights, we will hear 2 city cases from Gdynia in Poland and Lund in Sweden. Before we go on with the program, I'd like to remind you that the webinar is recorded and that throughout the webinar, we encourage all participants to ask questions via the Q&A box that you can see in the Zoom panel. The webinar recording will be available on the Baltic Sea Region SUMP Competence Center site. Okay, our first speaker and our key training expert, Kristina Gaučė, is an expert in sustainable urban mobility with over 20 years of experience in planning, policy development, and project management. She has a role as a key trainer in the JASPERS program and has been giving SUMP training in many EU member states. She's also the key training expert for our modules 1, 2, and 5 in this SUMP training program. And now she will brief us into the key elements of sustainable urban mobility planning. I give the word over to you, Kristina.
Thank you, Ira, and good morning, dear participants. Unfortunately, I cannot see you. However, I trust you are very sustainable and very interested in the topic, which is already a very good start of the day. So just please confirm if you can see my presentation now. Okay.
We do.
Okay, so let's rock. And as Ira already said, the whole setup of today and but also of the workshop next week is meant to encourage those who are starting or maybe to inspire those cities who are doing already SUMPs and maybe to update something for those who already have done the cycle of SUMPs and are up to new additions, reviews of the efficiency and so on. So we will have different type of presentations. And the first one, we will not go to any technical details. It's basically meant, this presentation has aimed to discuss and to agree why do we do those sustainable urban mobility plans and what we really want to achieve. And for questions how to do that, we will have presentations from Morgana after me and special tips for smaller cities and also good examples as was already presented. So I believe that the SUMP as concept already knows for decades and a couple of decades. And we don't have to stop here very much, but the key word here is always mobility. And I will be coming back and back to mobility of people and goods. This is our crucial questions here. It's not about modes, it's not about network, it's not about solely some type of the measures. It's about how and why and where and what time and with what modes people are moving and can we impact it or not. And in order to answer those questions, we need like really to understand and to address and to anticipate social and economical context, not to mention environmental context. And then when we do that, we need to understand that there is political background and sometimes limited capacities of the decision makers. So there are a lot of patterns which need to be put into one table, put into one document in order it works. And when I have those type of the trainings or presentations, I always like to start from the mobility definition. And although we speak about it many years already now, but I still sometimes meet people who think that mobility is bicycle or mobility is public transport stop or network. So isn't so. Mobility basically is a quality which allows you or not to move by choosing different alternatives. And when we start mobility plans, I think it's right. So to understand that there are some things which we cannot really influence, and we need to just acknowledge that, for example, frequency of trips per day, travel time, some cost which families are spending for the mobility in the households, those are nearly constants for almost 100 years after this topic has been started analyzing. But there are some variables which we can and we should and we are trying to change in our sustainable urban mobility plans. So basically, first of all, it's distribution of trips in space, meaning that as well planned social infrastructure and good mix of residential and working places you have in your city, as big a chance is to expect that your trips could be quite short and you do not need to commute 20, 30 kilometers one way to reach one destination. And having this on a plate, then you can expect that your model split could be quite sustainable, because if the number of trips, if the length of the trip is reasonable, you can expect that each of the mode could be chosen. And then it comes already to understanding that we have quite a good mobility in our cities. So when we speak about sustainable urban mobility plan, I always keep saying that be careful what you wish for. And those reminders on variables you can affect with your SMP, that's portion of your wishes which you need to embed in your vision and strategy, goals and objectives. But we will speak about it a little bit later. So just to summarize, mobility is not transportation, right? Transportation is just an act process from A to B. Somebody or something is moving or being moved. While mobility, that's a quality which explains how many choices did you have for that transportation act and how sustainable those were. And if they are less sustainable as you would like for your city, then that means that there is a room for a lot of ambitious measures in your sustainable urban mobility plan. And the idea of this, how to say, mm, um, putting into the a little bit of fight of traditional transportation planning and mobility is not to say that traditional transport master plans are somehow bad or not enough, just to say that sustainable urban mobility planning has slightly different principles and approaches, starting from who is the main focus. So that's the person or that's business which needs to be working effectively, not traffic as it would be in traditional transport plans, not specific mode, not achieving capacity, but achieving quality of life, accessibility, and equality, gender-wise, religion-wise, environmentally-wise, and so on and so on. So there are quite a differences between traditional transport plans and sustainable urban mobility plan. One also quite core thing to mention here that previously and still some sectoral strategic plans they are being prepared by good experts, but basically representing one topic, for example, transport modelers or traffic engineers. While a sustainable urban mobility plan, we have this huge variety of different experts, from anthropologists and gender equality experts to, of course, mobility planners, transport economists, architects, environmental experts, and so on. Nevertheless, we have very, very huge emphasis on involving with end users, who are those people who cycle, those people who use public transport, and also stakeholders who makes the decisions on how something should be set up in the city. So the whole approach of integration with and engagement with different groups of people is also very much different from traditional transport plans. But I believe you know that because when you might see in my slides, I'm always referring to the second edition of the SUMP guidelines for Europe, and those things are none, but sometimes like saying repetitorium as madre studiorum, what you learned, you need sometimes to be reminded. So where to start with mobility and how to start. So basically, when we will be summarizing the principles and during the presentation, I will be highlighting and articulating very strongly and quite a few times that it's very important to know what type of the city we want. And it's not about solving some acupuncture problems in our city, some ringabout or some missing lane. It's about really building a vision of what type of city we want for people who are not only commuting, but also coming here to invest, having logistic businesses, raising small children, having disabilities, coming as a tourist. So all those people all together, we make a big buzz in your city daily, and it's up to you and your uh, actions how to make it quite sustainable or very sustainable in comparison to what is now. So you in the picture you can see how to say again fight between angel and devil, and those are pictures from Vilnius. So on one side we have a lot of traffic jams, on the other side we have some sustainable patterns, and obviously the idea is to have as less cars and as more happy people and public spaces in our city. But you can define your vision on your own, and but the main accent here is that you need to have vision, not only to solve the problems, but you need to have vision. And I already mentioned that SUMP is not a project. You will have some files, right? You will have some files and some promotional guides so you can disseminate. So this is our document, right? But basically this is a process, and we will speak about different phases in upcoming presentations. However, already here I want to highlight this importance of integration of different layers. Sometimes it comes vertically, you will see in the other slides. Sometimes those are horizontal layers, but when you do SUMP, you need to understand that there are specific, some things are very specific for cities. Some are very common for the cities, but the main patterns, they are just the same. So basically you have urban area with different type of infrastructure, with different type of systems, different type of services, applications, and different type of business models, different public transport operators, shared economy, different policies. Somebody has low emission zones implemented. Somebody is still thinking about worth or not to have parking policy. So we have different type of backgrounds, and they all need to match together, and they all need to work in order to reach the goals of your and objectives of your SMP. And there is another pattern and another layer, existing planning context. Again, from city to city, it could be different documents, different type of culture of planning already implemented in place, different processes for decision makings. Nevertheless, we still in each city, we have already some overall strategies coming from master plans for city strategies for and some sectoral plans, CCAPs, ECAPs, bicycle route master plans, or I don't know, low emission zones pilots, and so on. So there are a lot of things already going on. And in SUMP, you cannot and do not have to compete with those. Basically, you need to make them work together, to harmonize what is already done before SUMP and what could be as continuation in your SUMP. For this, you need to understand very well what type of data is available, what type of tools municipality is having, what type of resources in terms of capacities and institutional competences you have in the city, but also what type of financial resources you have to implement SMP, not only to prepare, to map your stakeholders. So all together is quite a very exciting but quite complicating process of a lot of mini puzzle details which needs to be put into one picture in your SMP. Also, so that was how to say more or less horizontal level, right? It's also very important to keep this, so to say, vertical framework and not only legally but also values wise, because although from European level we come all with the same understanding of Vision Zero, Net Zero, of DG Move goals on TNT Annex 5 and different strategies and financing programs, when it comes to national level and when it's translated to national guidelines and recommendations, it might already differ a little bit, and some country might have clear priority on electrification of everything which is moving in the cities and in the rural area. Some countries are really focusing on active modes or environmental issues. So when you are thinking about your municipal level, you need to be also very much in line with what is happening in Europe, what are the main trends, and also what is the agenda of national policy. And when it comes to municipal level, not only you need to think about your SCMP and different strategies which you take from already ongoing documents or existing strategies, but you also need to think about awareness raising of both municipal staff, but also citizens and stakeholders. So you might need some capacity building events, sometimes some promotional events. So your SUMP becomes not only small document or big document with transport model and maps and Excel files, but it becomes the whole agenda for somebody who's working on that. And then there are also local pilots or local projects happening already. So you need to be very much aware, are those in harmony with what you are planning with your SUMPs. And it becomes very crucial when we speak about planning of functional urban area, which is going beyond the boundaries of administrative city. So you need to be very much aware that local projects which are happening in neighboring municipalities are not competing with the overall strategy of yours. And also, last but not least, there are a lot of different actors from society and private sector. And when it comes to municipality, you need to understand that you cannot really choose very properly place for implementation of your measures if you do not discuss it with society. And also you need to understand what is the benefits, but also consequences from private sector or to private sector of your SUMPs. For example, you might get like really good data from shared economy or freight representatives, but then you also need to discuss your requirements, for example, for future real estate developers for sustainability. Are they reasonable or not? So a lot of different actors, they are meeting in different phases and different with different purposes in SUMP. And this slide you are seeing now, just to illustrate a little bit how it's important to map at the very beginning which type of stakeholder, which type of actor you would need to be engaged in on which phase of SUMP. But we will have Model 5 on that, so I will not stop here for very long. And I will try just to summarize those guiding principles of SUMP, right? So I already said be careful what you wish for. So your SUMP basically need to keep very, very clear long-term vision, supported with very clear and precise implementation plan. And about measures we will speak on the second presentation of mine today. But for this, you need to have very clear goals and to understand what you are trying to achieve. So also it's very important that you assess not only current but also future performance, those mega trends which are happening in Europe in regard aging, in regard e-services usage, in regard of people, for example, being less and less healthy, so to say, although they are living longer, but after 65, every second person has at least one type of disability. So a lot of mega trends, but also your local forecast and prognosis are very important when you plan SUMP. So you don't plan for existing problems coverage, but you plan how to address, I don't know, new people coming to live to your city or the bad trend that people are using car more and more. So this is also one of the principles of SUMP. Now, what is also very important to integrate not only strategies and policies and different stakeholders, but also to understand that there are different type of modes for transportation, starting from your food and ending up with sometimes very complicated public transport modes, but also there is urban freight transport and logistic happening in the city, and especially it comes to huge importance when we speak about planning of TNT urban nodes, because both local commuting and regional or national or international freight logistics sometimes needs to meet in one city. So this is also one of the very important principles of SUMP. And then for engagement and participatory approach and coordination with different initiatives and entities, I already mentioned that, but we would have model number 5 in May about it. So we will speak quite a lot and we learn, I hope, quite a lot during then. The same with monitoring and review. This topic, to my practice in the previous SUMP, was very, very much underestimated, and we had a lot of nice measures which were know-how connected to indicators to ever monitored if the implementation happened in time, if the implementation had any impact of sustainability, and if this impact was enough, and if it was not enough, was it reviewed, and any additional measures what. So this topic is also very important here, and this principle will be discussed more in February. We will have 2 events, webinar and workshop for monitoring as well. And last but not least, I already mentioned that there is guidelines, and I will show at the end of the slides also quite a number of brochures and different tools you can use from European level as a methodological support, but there is also financing support, I think, and different programs going on for cities to learn and to implement some pilots. But also, I think Morgana will speak about guidelines, at least in terms of guidelines here. So those were the main principles of SUMPs. And should you, by this point, not be enough convinced yet why would you need to have SUMP. There is also obligation. In some national guidelines, for example, in Lithuania, we do have this very clear definition what type of cities and what size of the cities we should have SUMPs. In some countries, this is not obligatory, but what is obligatory from perspective of European regulation is to have SUMPs for urban nodes, which are junctions in Trans-European network corridors and TNT corridors. So before new TNT regulation arrived, we had less than 100 urban nodes in the whole Europe. Now more than 400 of urban nodes were qualified as TNT urban nodes, meaning that this qualification is not only kind of recognition of importance of the city, but also put some obligations to the city. And one of them, and the main one, is to have SUMP prepared or updated by the end of 2027 in the way it covers the whole functional urban area. And what is the functional urban area? We will speak in the last slides of this presentation. So I've been delivered training now, I think in 16 or 17 countries. Even the smallest one had at least 1 or 2 or 5 urban nodes. So without knowing the geography of our participants, I believe that at least some of you represent urban nodes and know that you have not only prepare SUMP, but also to start collecting and reporting urban mobility data for the whole functional urban area of your city, and also to implement multimodal hubs for passengers and also freight terminals by 2040. So that's the background for TNT idea. And when it comes to urban nodes and functional urban areas, and by the way, despite that some of the representatives today are not representative urban nodes for TNT network, the idea of what needs to be planned and what functional urban area needs to be discussed applies to each city. Even the smallest city, the smallest town has is a role model and donor in a way for some satellite your commuting area. Understanding the main points you need to cover with your SUMP is crucial for all the cities. However, for TNT urban nodes, it's very important also not to cover only local commuting areas, but also to cover the main intersections with TNT network, airports, ports, regional coach stations or train stations, or corridors as Rail Baltica or Via Baltica. I'm speaking from Baltic Sea region's perspective. So those are need to be covered with functional urban area, which needs to be planned with SUMP later on. And here's very simple example how this area should be calculated. So basically you have some here. This is a Genoa example. You have somewhere here city center, and then you identify your city by its density and some parameters. For example, that at least one homogeneous cell has to have at least 50% of working places and residents as in the city center. So it has to be like really dense to be called city, although your city boundaries might be somewhere here. I don't know if you see my mouse moving. So when you have your city area, and if you see that at least 50% of each neighboring area are commuting on daily basis to the city as per se, that means that you have your commuting area, and then you have some enclaves which you need to include or exclude depending on the context. So functional urban area principle needs to be kept despite you are planning TNT urban node or you are doing a regular SUMP for your city or town. So so here is also one tip, although we have those recommendations how to calculate functional urban area, but I will be telling more maybe on small and medium cities model today. It's very important that you are practical and you do not include too many different authorities in one planning area, because then you would basically need to carry some responsibilities for the areas you include without them being willing to contribute. So being practical and reasonable always helps when you do SUMP. So that's the principles from our perspectives. And if we have a couple of minutes, I would like to test temperature in the room. And we have here we have a short poll on Mentimeter, and I would like participants to join Mentimeter or by scanning QR code or by using menti.com and using the code you see on the top of the slide. And yeah, idea here would be to hear from you which steps do you see the most attention requiring. So I don't remember. I think it works on the ranking principle, the slide, but yeah, just go join Mentimeter. I see 21 participant already joined, and start voting on this. Okay, yeah. I would like to stop here for a minute because I see that nearly 1/3 of participants yet voted. So just to wait for the full picture. Yeah, but yeah, my favorite and your favorite, I think, is the same as political agreement. And then, unfortunately, it is so sad that all your expertise and all your knowledge and all your rationales for what needs to be done for your city, like really depends on the political support. That is why it's very important to map those politicians, and not only mayors, not only vice mayors, not only the ruling party, but also opposing politicians, because there are in doesn't matter which political agenda they are carrying. Normally, they do have some goals in the programs which really match with sustainable urban goals. None of the politicians would like people keep dying in the city. None of them would like people to be insecure or harassed. So you can always find some matching points with politicians and try to convince them for the best sake of SUMPs. So I think that the results are stable now. So thank you for voting. This is some food for our thoughts, and we take it as a data from this workshop. And should you like to ask more about that or make any comments, there is Q&A box which you could use. And to finish with this presentation, and I will be showing this slide a few more times, there are a lot of guidelines and tools and reference materials on different topics on SUMP guidelines, on sustainable urban logistic plans, on small cities, on touristic areas. So whichever you would need to read, there is a whole library for you. We also prepare some independent learning material you can see on the website. And we have also some independent exercises, which I will present later for this topic as well. So thank you so much. So far, at least I'm doing good. I cannot see you. I hope you are doing well as well. So thank you for the floor, and I give it back to you, Ira, then.
Okay, thank you, Kristina. And I take the opportunity and remind everyone that you can post questions in the Q&A box. So please go there and ask your questions. Meanwhile, I'm trying to share presentation. And the last slide of Kristina was a good link to our next speaker, that is Morgan Julia, who is a consultant and a mobility researcher at Ruprecht Consult, specializing in sustainable urban mobility and urban planning with a background in urban policy. And she has been authoring and co-authoring multiple SUMP reference documents. And today she will share with us some news about the upcoming update of the SUMP guidelines and brief us into what is new the guidelines. So over to you, Morgan.
Thank you very much, Ira, for the introduction. I'll share my screen. So you should be able to see my screen currently. Just don't hesitate to raise your hand if there's any technical errors. Thank you very much also, Kristina, for the presentation before. I think it's a good transition and you laid really some solid ground for me to build on to present the update. So maybe some of the participants already know that the update, the SUMP guidelines will be updated. This is something we've been working on for 1.5 years now along the European Commission, and part of the content of this update was already presented at the Urban Mobility Days in October last year. So today I just wanted to give you a bit more details on what it entails, but also to give you a bit of more context as to why those guidelines are being updated. So we know now that the SUMP concept was developed a bit more than 10 years ago with a first SUMP guideline published in 2013. And then the second edition, that is still the current one being used, was published in 2019 out of a result of the evolution of the concept, but also based on practices and feedbacks from practitioners that have been implementing SUMPs before. And then in 2023, the European Commission, so DG Move, has updated the SUMP concept with the recommendation for the national SUMP support programs, which provides a common understanding for the SUMP concept at the EU level, but also across member states. And within these recommendations lies the SUMP principles that Kristina also presented today. And since then, we also have the 10T regulation that was validated in 2024, which really provides a standardization of SUMP with specific requirements for the urban nodes detailed in the Annex 5 of this same regulation. So this is why we see an importance of updating the SUMP guidelines to align with this evolution of EU requirements and also of the concept. But this is also to align with recent mobility trends that have been developing since 2019, so since the last update, as well as some technical shifts. And of course, to also align with climate deadlines of reaching net zero by 2050. So this update is really aimed to support all cities, not necessarily only urban nodes, and to provide for the clarifications, new links, fresh examples. It does not necessarily provide a clarification for the 10T requirement, and there's definitely no new requirements within this guideline. So it's really rather to provide additional support. And this is also based on practitioners' feedback, since we had a first feedback round during the Civitas Forum in 2024, and then during the Urban Mobility Days in 2025. So before going into details as to what are those changes, to give a bit of an idea of what it entails, we have improved language, updated links. We try to be more action-oriented, more user-friendly. There's a slight change in the layout, which is also supposed to support the translations. So the guidelines, the new update will also be translated into the European languages to, of course, support for the 10T implementation. What is new really is the update of the SUMP principles that has been highlighted previously, the alignment of the 10T and its requirements for urban nodes, but also highlighting national SUMP support programs and the planning with long-haul transport stakeholders. When it comes to more of an update, there's the alignment with more recent European policies, but also further integration of database decision-making with more recent evolution of transport planning, database spaces, indicators, monitoring, and so forth. And when it comes to really a stronger improvement of the guidelines, there's a further emphasis on really planning beyond the city borders, so with inclusion of peri-urban and potentially rural planning, and stronger cooperation and collaboration models. The integration of urban freight and logistics with additional specifications, and a further emphasis on inclusion and transport poverty. So before going into more details per phases, we wanted to give you a bit of an idea of how much of an intensity of the changes are in each of the steps. So as you can see, there's a larger update or changes within the first 2 phases of the SUMP cycle, with some also in the third phase, but all in the end leading to a stronger emphasis and preparation for the implementation. So again, it's really providing additional clarification to better support and have really teams that are ready for the implementation when the implementation comes. So when it comes to more detailed information on what are in the updated guidelines, when it comes to the introduction and the section 1, so really putting into context the SUMP concepts, we have now updated the evolution of the European policy, so really aligning with what has happened since 2019. Of course, the TEN-T regulation being introduced, and what are the specific requirements for the urban nodes, but what opportunities lies also for small and medium cities with the implementation of the TEN-T regulation. So with, for example, the national SUMP support programs, and of course, highlighting a bit more in details, what are the new SUMP principles. Within phase 1, there's a further emphasis on planning beyond the city borders and urban logistics. So there's a bit more integration of documents that have been, so SUMP reference documents that have been developed in the past, so metropolitan level, neighborhood planning as well. There's a practice example also from SmarterNet, focusing on more rural and remote planning. There's a further alignment also with other planning processes, namely land use, but also energy, that is strong emphasis there, and stronger links with urban logistics and freights. So really long information there on how to link those two. Still in phase 1, we also have a consideration of the climate neutral and smart cities mission. So in terms of reaching climate goals, with further integration of the concept of resilience, but also how to align, for example, SUMPs and climate city contracts, as a lot of urban nodes are also cities missions. And we have an example from the Leuven climate planning approach. There's also a further strengthening of the use of data, with an additional box on transport modeling and the diverse use depending on local capacities and contexts, but also a toolbox from the learnings from the Deploy EMDS project, which is linked to the European mobility data spaces. And last but not least, there's the introduction of really transport poverty and further emphasis on inclusion that builds upon the recent European Commission recommendation on transport poverty that were published in July last year. Moving on to phase 2, there's a much stronger emphasis on data-driven planning decisions, with the introduction of backcasting for scenario building, with further links towards recent EU directives such as the ITS and MMTS1, but also introduction of European data spaces and the opportunities that lies there, as well as how to reinforce monitoring capacities already in this phase to be better prepared for the last phase of the SUMP. There's a further emphasis of engaging with TEN-T stakeholders, namely, for example, long transport operators for both passengers and goods, and the idea that there might be a need for having differentiated mobility objectives to really reflect diverse challenges and opportunities when it comes to planning beyond the city borders. And of course, a box on indicators, but here really highlighting the need to have a more comprehensive approach to selection of indicators, building upon the urban mobility indicators that will be mentioned in the TEN-T Implementation Act that we're still waiting for this year. In phase 3, we have additional information there on, again, better prepare for implementation. So with having project cost estimation and operational planning, having differentiated funding approaches, maybe more innovative in some cases, and then also of course, information on different approaches to planning and implementing beyond the city borders. So with, for example, cooperation models, examples coming from Flanders and Poland, but also cooperation and collaboration methods, and also key measures that could be implemented to improve the integration of peri-urban and rural areas. And last but not least, the last phase of the SUMP process, which is also often the one that participants take, or practitioners often struggle with when it comes to implementation. Here we have a new box on living labs and also further information on monitoring and evaluation. So the use of mobility dashboards, but also strengthening the link between monitoring to evaluation to then lessons learned. So the guidelines will hopefully come soon by the first quarter of this year. We invite you to just stay informed on using the EU Urban Mobility Observatory, which is where it will be published. And that will be it from my side.
Thank you so much, Morgan. And now if you have any questions to Morgan, please post them now, since Morgan only has a few minutes left before she needs to move on to another meeting. So it's a good time to ask. Okay, I will take over the control from you and introduce our next speaker. And next we will hear a case from City of Gdynia in Poland from Kristina Gaučė, who is a senior specialist at the Gdynia City Hall. And Gdynia has a comprehensive history with SUMP, and at the moment Kristina is working for updating their SUMP. So Kristina will share with us lessons learned from the Gdynia's 12 steps approach of developing SUMP.
Hi everyone, once again, my name is Kristina Gaučė. I represent Gdynia City Hall, and I work in Traffic Mobility Management Department, in Mobility Unit in Investment Department. And today for you, I would like to share a very practical story, I think, how we are building a SUMP in Gdynia, what was difficult for us and what we learn on the way, because we have a lot of experiences with the SUMP documents and also another strategy documents in Poland, in Gdynia. When I say 12 steps, I don't mean a perfect checklist to check. For us, it was more like a roadmap that helped us turn a strategy into everyday work. It's a lot of difficulties in this project, in this process, and you will see a few things that work for us and also a few mistakes and some lessons that I think other cities can use, even if your context is not the same like us. Maybe it's different, but I think it's helpful. So, okay. Yeah. So why did Gdynia need a SUMP? For us, SUMP was not about writing another document or something like that, but it was a really decision to change how the city works in sustainable mobility, because Gdynia is a medium-sized port city in the Baltic Sea region, and we have a very compact city center close to the sea, with a limited public space in the city center. At the same time, there is strong pressure from private car traffic. Many streets were doing too many things at once, and cars, buses, bikes, pedestrians, you know. And another issue was that we already had many strategies and sectoral plans, but they were good documents, but they often worked next to each other, something not together. And mobility decisions were taken in different departments, sometimes separately, and each decision made sense on its own, but not always for the city as a whole city. So we in Gdynia, we needed something that would connect all these pieces together, and something that helps people ask the same question every day. Is this a decision moving the city in the direction we agreed on or not? And that's, I think, why SUMP document became important for us. And the first, like the 10 years ago, from 2016, we've had. These slides for you shows the real problem we had in Gdynia, but I think in other cities too. Our SUMP goals were good. Our strategy, document strategy goals were good, but they were ambitious, officially adopted, consulted with the public, long-term, smart. On paper, we have everything, and everything was correct. But in everyday work, sometimes it looked very different. People were busy. They work under time pressure. There were many documents, many meetings, many opinions. Very often, colleagues simply didn't know how our strategic goals should affect one concrete decision. Decisions were based on habits, personal experience, or what felt safe. The main challenge for us was not a lack of vision or something like that. The challenge was the gap between the strategy and daily decisions and daily everyday work. And we ask ourselves a very simple questions. How do we make a big strategy part of everyday life? And how do we help a project manager, officers in the city, or an architect to connect their daily work with long-term goals in the city? And this is the gap between the strategy and also the practice, like you say on the slides, I think, became the starting point for changing how we use SUMP in Gdynia. This slide shows for you the real change that happened in Gdynia. At the beginning, SUMP was seen as just another strategy. Important, official, but still a document. Over time, we changed this approach through the last 10 years. SUMP became a management tool, something like this, something people could actually use in daily work, not only refer to once every few years. The first shift was from a single document to a shared process, and the 12-step SUMP framework helped us organize work across departments, but not as a checklist and check the step, but as a common logic. And people start to ask from different departments, which step are we in, what comes next, and what should be involved in the process. And I think the second shift was from plans to testing. And instead of waiting for perfect solutions, we started to use pilots and small interventions in public space. And these pilots that we have and we plan were not final investments. Then they were some learning tools. We test ideas, collect feedbacks from the residents, from another group of stakeholders, and also adjust decision. And finally, we changed how we think about the monitoring, and evaluation part. It was no longer only about the reporting progress. It became, I think, for me, way to learn, correct also the mistakes and improve future actions. And this slide shows for you what really changed on the ground. Very often we talk about strategy, but the key question is always for us, what actually happens after the document is finished, what we have and what we implement. In Gdynia, SUMP influence action in three main ways, like the first, the pilots, and the second, decisions, and finally, learning. And I think this is the most important 4 slides for my presentation. The first slide shows the most important lessons for you, maybe we learn in Gdynia. And I want to be honest for you, most of them are not technical. The first lessons is that the SUMP is a political and organizational process. It's not only a technical one. Changes in political levels, in political priorities or decision makers have a big impact for our implementation. So for me, continuity doesn't happen by itself. It needs to be protected. It needs to be explained again and again and again. And sometimes it's not easy to talk to increasing awareness step by step, but it's very important to do it. And the second, stakeholder engagement must happen at many levels, not only with city leaders, but also with district council, different groups of residents. What helped us was finding the ambassadors from every groups of stakeholders and people who understand the process and can explain it to others. This really reduce resistance and be process more effective for the city. And our third lesson, dialogue works better than pressure. Instead of pushing solutions, we talk many times about the same goals. We use different language, easy language, different formats, different tools. Pilots and small experiments help us, help people see benefit is real life, not only on the paper. And that builds trust from the city level to the residents and other groups of stakeholders. Fourth, SUMP must be explained as a roadmap, not a restriction. People need to understand in the city why the documents matters, clear and simple goals combined with a realistic vision, not something like the high-level version, but the simple and realistic, because it help connect strategy with everyday decisions. So for us, SUMP was not about one big moment. It was about many small steps, many conversations that we have over time through the last more than 10 years, I think. This slide is about things that are less maybe visible, but very important in everyday work. The fifth lesson is that internal dialogue with stakeholders is as important as public consultation, because SUMP doesn't work only in meetings with residents. It works or doesn't work sometimes in daily cooperation inside the hall and inside City Hall. If departments don't understand our goals, the same goals, the strategy, our SUMP stays abstract and hard to use and hard to implement in the city. So we spend a lot of time explaining SUMP internally, not only outside. And I think this is one of the most important points. Lessons number 6. Monitoring and evaluation process are often underestimated, but very crucial. In reality, monitoring is often done by very small teams, unfortunately, sometimes manually, sometimes with limited tools, sometimes with no open data systems or something like that. And our experience is simple. We had simple and realistic indicators right now, and it works better than complex system that cannot be maintained, cannot be understandable. If a city cannot update data regularly, the system stops being useful, stops being helpful. Lesson 7. SUMP implementation requires negotiation and moderation skills, and I think some psychology skills, because conflicts are normal between mobility, greenery, safety, parking, all the time when we've had the consultation part of the process of the SUMP preparing. And what matters is the ability to explain trade-offs, to slow down the discussion, to care about the residents, about the different group of stakeholders, and to help people see not only the small picture, but also the bigger picture. And the last lesson, external support helps with preparing documents, but ownership must stay in the city. I think for us is the important element for us, because external experts are very useful in some parts of the SUMP document. But if the city doesn't own the process, the document, I think, becomes generic and maybe not concrete information inside, not local contexts. And strong internal ownership is what keeps SUMP alive in the city, not only on the paper. Even when stuff changes or priorities shift, but we still SUMP alive in the city. So again, this is not only about planning skills, it's about people, it's about cooperation, it's about the vision and believing in our process, not only the writing the documents. And now I would like to switch from lesson learned to something more practical, but it's, I think, the connection with the last slides. It's about what other cities should really prepare for if they want to develop SUMP in a similar way. First, team and internal capacity. In Gdynia, the core team was, I think, so small, usually 1 or 2 people for core team, obvious, often without a formal mandate. And very often this was an extra task, not a separate position for doing the SUMP document. So SUMP moved forward mainly thanks to individual commitment and long-term continuity. This is important to say clearly, and in-house SUMP process needs people who stay in the process for years. Unfortunately, maybe it's the good idea, but sometimes it's not possible, not only for months or like the 6 months or something. It's not so long to preparing and implement and doing the action plan and monitoring and evaluation process in the city. Second, time pressure and political cycles. I think political changes strongly affect implementation. Because each change in leadership means explaining SUMP again from the beginning, like I said it before, what it is, why it matters, and how it supports everyday decisions in the city, why it's important for us, for the city, and what is it. So cities need to be ready for this, to rebuild understanding again and again, and increasing awareness again and again, and to re-anchor SUMP in decision-making. Third, participation. Participation takes time, and at the beginning, it often increases resistance, and this is normal. What helped us was dialogue, careful language, and pilots instead of final solutions. People need time to get used to change. In our experience, real acceptance usually takes between 3 and 12 months, I think. And finally, I think the last topic for this moment, data monitoring and realism. Monitoring in practice is often manual and limited by capacity. It's like the summary from the lessons learned, but maybe more specific. Not all indicators that we've had in the first SUMP work in real life. Some had to be simplified right now in the second SUMP update. And what helped were simple, realistic indicators, testing new tools for the better indicators, like we've had from the SUMPs for BES project, AI-based detection of pedestrian and cyclists. It's something new in our cities, in our city, and also I think in a lot of cities in Europe. So the key message here is simple for you. It's not about the copying documents. It's about the preparing the organization for this, the people for implementation, and the way the city works every day. Sometimes we forgot about the simple element, but the most important elements to do it better than before. And thank you very much.
We need to move on soon, so if you can wrap up shortly.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think this is only the photos from our participation process and for doing for the meeting in internal groups on the left and in residents in the city. And if you have a lot of more questions, if you have questions after my presentation, I will be on the chat. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kristina. There are actually a couple of questions for you in the Q&A, so if you can go there and answer the questions, so you can do that. Meanwhile, we go on with the agenda, and now it's time to give word back to Kristina.
Thank you, Ira. And I think, do we have any changes in agenda? I just want to understand the timing.
We are still waiting for one of the panelists, but we'll see how we fix the technical issue that is currently ongoing. I'll keep you informed.
Okay, so I trust you see now my presentation, right? Yes, okay. And I also saw, and thank you, Damian, for putting the question in the Q&A box. I believe it was meant maybe to Morgana, who left already. So knowing the question about how next level SUMPs can address operational implementation and integration issues, I think I will try to highlight it in my presentation as well. But in a nutshell, basically it's about quality and upscaleness of SUMP, right? If it's only strategy with no relation to what funds are available, what capacities are in the city, what are the forecast and what time horizon city is addressing, then it's not about guidelines. It's about the quality of SUMP, how precisely within different type of dialogues measures were planned. If the measures were planned without implementation units even knowing that they would need to implement, or without involving spatial planning units, or without speaking to public transport operators, if those measures were planned solely in the room by experts, then it's quite likely none of the guidelines would help. The SUMP is nearly to fail, but still you can do monitoring and to see which measures were effective, and if not, to find the reasons. So that's my short take up on Damian's question regarding next level SUMPs. And this module, this presentation we have now is orientated to provide some tips to small and medium-sized cities and towns. And you already saw this cycle from Morgana, and I will not stop here for a big time. I want to emphasize that out of those 30 few actions and 12 steps, which also Kristina went very well with being example, my focus is to those 4 stages and success of not missing any of those stages. So we will go in a little of details to each of the phases. And as you can see, 3 phases basically of SUMP cycle. They cover preparation for SUMP development, and then the fourth is implementation and monitoring. And I coming back again to the question from the audience, I think the secret is in the third and fourth phase, how ready you are for implementation. So I will go step by step to each of the phases. However, what I want to emphasize already here for especially for small towns and not for cities like Dina, but cities who are less than 100,000 inhabitants or even less than 50,000 inhabitants, it's being practical and like really realistic on and with resources you have for SUMP planning, it's not always necessary like really to follow each step. You can combine and simplify some steps, especially on analysis phase and maybe on development of scenario and vision. It could be quite straightforward. However, it's very important that you keep all the phases. So basically you prepare well, you understand the context very well, and then you have a strategy, and then you align the measures to that strategy. So that's the secret of SUMP, not particular small activity in there. So why did I mention prepare well? Because again, I already said that monitoring and evaluation is and was very, very underestimated phase and step of SUMP cycle, but also preparation. Preparation in terms of resources city would have not only to prepare SUMP, but also to implement SUMP. And when I speak about resources, the easiest is financial, because with money, everybody can do it, right? However, there are also quite a lot examples where SUMPs fails to achieve any results because there are very, very nice and good resources and enthusiastic as Kristina to prepare SUMP, but there is no capacities and teams and also competences and skill to implement or to provoke implementation after SUMP is prepared. So it's very important to understand the structure. Who would be working on SUMP? Does he or she or the team, do they have sufficient skills, tools, and sources and time capacity to run the project? And then who would be implementing? Do you have already on board those persons who would be responsible for implementation? If not, now it's time to take care of that. And then it's also very important to understand the planning context, as I already show in the previous presentation, and to identify not only problems, but also opportunities and to forecast the future. And when I speak about problems, I don't speak about specific points and locations only. I speak also about reasons why the problems are happening. So sometimes you have spatial problems, but quite often you have problems in the process which you cannot see nor from transport model nor from statistical data. In order to understand the problems, you need to have quite a good quantitative analysis of the situations in your city. And for the stakeholders is the best lakmus paper. If you get engaged with end users and stakeholders, you can understand very well about your city situations without holding like really expensive data collections plans. So in each phase, my idea is here to show a little bit of challenges we have in each phase, and then to come up with some suggestions for solutions. So when it comes to phase one, which is about getting ready and analyzing existing situation, one of the challenges is lack of resources and lack of capacities. So as a tip here, it would be pooling resources with neighboring city or taking advantage from regional or international organizations with some donations or capacity building at least, or maybe some umbrella planning type. So you can form only very, very detailed solutions for your city. Another quite often met challenge is not sufficient capacities and capabilities of municipalities to run such a projects. and it's totally fine to admit that. So in this phase one, you need to do the self-analysis and to understand how many new people you need to hire for some specific tasks. Although I was very impressed to see that in Gdynia, it was only a couple of people to run SUMP. So you see, very good, enthusiastic people are enough to have two, but sometimes even 10 people cannot make a change. So you need to understand the context in your team, and then if needed to purchase some tools like, I don't know, GIS software or modeling tool, or to have capacity building, or you need to hire external experts on providing the whole context or some parts of SUMP context. And one of the major problem which smaller towns and cities keeps liking reporting is the lack of the data. However, with this presentation, we really want to encourage you not to fetish that much data. Data is needed very much, and without data, it might seem that there are nor problems nor situations to analyze. However, data only supports your decision. So basically, if you know very well what type of city you want to achieve, it's not that much important why 10 or 20 years some dynamic was here or there different. So you need to be very practical on what data to collect, and you probably already know a lot about your city by looking at the window, by going to some schools and asking kids to raise the hands on the mode we choose. So be creative with data, upgrade as much as possible national or regional data indicators to your situation, and try to focus also on your indicators, the way you can use data somebody else collecting, so you can see the progress without repeating service again. So be creating on data collection and planning, and only after you recycle all the possible data, then prepare data collection plan, what else needs to be collected. But for this, what else of data need to be collected, you need to be already very well aware on what type of city you want to achieve. So for example, if your city vision is green as possible and only active modes as priority, then most likely you would need to have some data sets on active mode use and satisfaction of cyclists, for example, or quality of public spaces. But should your city ambition would be like really, really fast and efficient public transportation and a city for, I don't know, students, startups, and investors to come, then you might not need to collect unnecessary and nice to have data and to focus to the data you need. So strategy development is crucial to be thought about already in the first phase, as you see from my examples. And what needs to be done under strategy development? So first of all, to develop at least few scenarios, different scenarios of different cities you might wish to have, and we will test this exercise in our workshop in the week time. So I will not speak too much about possible scenarios and how to choose one. However, it's very important that your chosen scenario, is it spatial? Is it only like strategical with some infographics? Needs to be supported with very clear objectives and very, very clear indicators what you want to achieve. Do you want to reduce pollution? Do you want to reduce social equality? Do you want to increase income and direct international investment to your city? So you need to be very careful with this SUMP and with all the efforts you're putting, what you want to achieve as the final results. And putting indicators, don't be too ambitious. There are a lot of indicators already being, at least data sets being collected nationally or regionally or citywide. You might wish to choose something from those and not to prevent yourself from good monitoring because you have too ambitious monitoring plan, but we will speak about this next month. However, it's very important here. So what are the main challenges? Normally, the challenges are twofold. So when it comes to indicators and targets, sometimes it's very difficult to define the targets because you do not know baseline. That's why I said you need to think about what data you need to collect already, thinking about what the type of the progress you would be like to observing. Another challenge which happens quite a lot, not only to small and medium, but also to large metropolitans, how to choose among different scenarios and how to validate those scenarios with different stakeholders and citizens. So there are a lot of techniques how to do that. And I will not stop here now. I just want to articulate it very much. It's not enough to have scenarios. You need to do all or multi-criteria or strategical impact assessment for each of scenario, and necessarily to consult with stakeholders, sometimes also with citizens. But when it comes to discussion of scenario, normally citizens are, how to say, too romantic and they vote, and sometimes less rational. So because it's about city, they vote for all the trendy things. However, discussion with stakeholders and understanding how realistic one of the scenarios to happen for the city is much more important than discussion with citizens or having hackathons or something else. And the third phase is measure planning. So here is very important. And again, it's a little bit of the answer to Damian's question. It's very important not only to have random measures constructing this and that and other things. It's very important to have good complex of the measures and good synergy with the measures. And when we, for example, when I'm working on my SUMPs, when we do packages of the measures, those are not thematic packages. Those are packages which are implemented together, contribute to achieving one or another objective. So it's very important that in your measure list, you have as much as variety of not only construction, but policy related capacity, awareness raising measures, some operational measures, innovations, and so on and so on. So basically, if you, for example, decide to extend public transport line, you might also think if there is a land for the last stop here, if there is a possibility to, I don't know, to extend the ticket, is there is a chance maybe to connect with bicycle lane that stop, and if next operator which is coming to the same point can merge the same station, and so on. So a lot of different type of integrality needs to be fought during measure stage. And in order those measure happens to life, it's not about guidelines, but it's about action plan which you would prepare. Action and robust implementation plan, those are the secrets of the SUMP success, because the best SUMP is not the awarded document, but implemented plan. So implementation of 100% of the measures you design leads you to, I don't know, 60, 70 maybe percent of success when it comes to comparison to your goals. So action plans, robust implementation plan linked with funding mechanism or funding sources, that's the secret of the measures planning. And the last phase there will be monitoring, and I will not speak too much about monitoring. So I want also to encourage small and medium-sized municipalities. Should you have some challenges with implementation because of the funds needed, I also want to remind very well that there are also very, very efficient and impactful low-cost measures. So what normally cities would do, they would focus on high-cost measures as new BRT line, new bus, new this and that. However, a lot of evidence from different modeling results and practical cases showed that organizational and educational measures, sometimes they achieve a much higher effect. For example, parking policies having more impact on usage of public transport than extension of public transport in network. So this is something also to bear in mind when you are planning your measures. Be realistic. Plan the measures you can really afford and implement. And once the measures are planned, please do monitoring and evaluation. So we will have model on next month on that, so I will not get into much of the details. However, it's very, very important that with monitoring, you need not only to track progress of implementation, not only to document if implementation was done the way it planned, but also, I mean, in terms of quantity, time, and quality, and so on. But what is the most important, you need to monitor the impact of the particular measure you implemented. And if you see that measure is not working, it's not performing in the way you were expecting at the very beginning, that means that you need to take remedial actions and to change the nature of the measure, or maybe to add a new measure. So monitoring is also very important phase, but evaluation and redoing something in your SUMP, it's much more important. So that's, I think, again, my tip and advice to Damien and the other guys. Only you can evaluate your SUMP is working on purpose or not, and if not, then what next measures to add to that SUMP. So to sum up, I think as I said already, the most successful SUMP is the one which is implemented. However, when it comes to preparation, it's very important to be realistic, to be practical, to cooperate as much as possible to different institutions, and especially with stakeholders who can give you a lot of data and a lot of insights, and to be co-creative when you design your scenarios, and also to upscale your measures. If you have a traffic model, that's all right. If you're not, just at least do multi-criteria analysis, which one of the parts, of course, should be primitive if you don't have too much resources, but still cost benefit analysis should be done for each of the measure you are suggesting. And if you do not trust that your SUMP can be implemented 100% the way you were expecting it to happen, then you might wish to add practical guides to your SUMPs. For example, in Vilnius, we have not only SUMP, but also practical guide how pedestrian infrastructure should be designed and built. So yeah, be precise as much as your resources are allowing that to do. What is next? Next is next week. So we will have we will meet again next week. And for those who already registered for the workshop, and for those who are still have some time to register for the workshop today, and I think until tomorrow, I want just to let you know that you would be receiving some handouts for the workshop. However, those who are not planning to participate in the workshop or the following trainings, but still want to do some independent learning, there is not only independent learning material next to each module in our website, but also each module has some independent exercises actually in this case. So before we let you go to your afternoon, I want to announce that anyone can access to 2 different type of exercises, and they are presented in some written form, so you can follow it easy. Just to highlight, the first exercise is about understanding the visioning efforts of your city. So our suggestion for you is to go and to analyze previous strategical or still ongoing and valid documents, and to see if there are visioning efforts which could be applied in your SUMP, identify goals and objectives, and maybe already collected indicators which you could repeat in your SUMP. Meaning that, for example, if ECAP or CCAP is already indicator, I don't know, to decrease the number of polluted day per year in city, this and that, you can also copy paste that indicator without collecting new data. So do this exercise in favor of your future or ongoing SUMPs. Also, what we suggest to do, despite you have SUMP or just planning to have one, you can use a SUMP self-assessment tool, which is working in 8 areas of question groups. So you can again measure and have very nice windrows with windrows diagram to understand in comparison to ideal case how what are the gaps in your SUMP or your planning process. Maybe you have very good content, but participation is not enough, or maybe you miss monitoring part. So you can do this second exercise as well. We really invite you to do that, and then to work further during the workshop next week. What we also invite you to do, we still haven't finalized the list of the cities who would be receiving SUMP clinic support. So we want to invite once again those who haven't applied yet to apply, and we will be very happy to choose 10 cities and to work on personalized roadmaps for those cities depending on the challenge we would be reporting. So please dare to contact us to apply, and I hope to have very fruitful work with those 10 cities. And last but not least, our upcoming trainings. I kind of know that the majority of you registered already for all the trainings, but just to remind, next week we have workshop on this module 1, and in February we have module 2 about monitoring and evaluation. Then in March we have module specifically designed for collection of data for active modes. Module 4 in April for different type of pilots to promote active modes, and one of them, my favorite, is in May about engaging stakeholders, mapping and choosing proper formats for that. So you still can register for upcoming events as well. And thank you for having so much of me today, and thank you for listening. And word to you, Ira.
Thank you so much, Kristina, and thank you all our other panelists for today. And a big thank you for all who have joined today's first webinar. And like Kristina mentioned, there is still time to register to the workshop next week and also apply to the SUMP clinic. So don't forget to do that. And thank you, and see you in the upcoming webinars and workshops.